You're watching PM Agenda. Time to bring in our panel of political strategists, Bruce Hawker and Grahame Morris, joining us once again. Thank you both for being here. Good to see you. I want to start with your thoughts on the opinion poll out today. This is the Fairfax-Ipsos poll. A lot better for the government than last week's news poll, which was 50-50. The Ipsos one, Grahame, is 53-47, and even better for Malcolm Turnbull personally. He's really leaving Bill Shorten behind in the popularity stakes. Is your vibe here that this is about where things sit, or is this overly generous?
Look, it might be a little bit generous, but look, we're all looking for trends, and I think we could now officially say that that trend where the coalition was going to come second in a two-horse race for 18 months has ended. You know, it is an extraordinary turnaround. But I thought the interesting thing about the poll is that finally we have a pollster who's not being, you know, cheap and quick and whatnot. There's another poll that they had which said, hey, where are your preferences going to go? Instead of just distributing on what happened on last election's preferences, and that was even stronger. Well, that comes for Malcolm Turnbull.
Exactly. So instead of saying this is what people did last time, we'll allocate preferences that way, they ask people which way do you go, and that gives them a 54-46 lead.
And that is, and that is an extraordinary result. Well, you know, I've worked with leaders over the years that probably at their most dangerous when things are going well, that all of a sudden they start making mistakes. But it'd be interesting to run a book. Who is going to be the first minister to make a mistake that brings everyone down to earth?
It'll happen. It'll happen, Bruce. What's your sense of these sort of numbers? I mean, where do you think it really sits?
Probably pretty much in that space, David. I was always very concerned that Abbott would go and Turnbull would take over. I mean, he's drawing Australia into the centre ground. He's drawing his party into the centre ground. It's where most Australians feel comfortable. And so right now, the promise that he brings, obviously it hasn't been matched with, policy, but the promise of a more mainstream political leadership, more stable and settled after many years of a lot of instability, I think is something the Australian public's craving for. So in the short term, this is very good news and very accurate, I suspect.
Good news, Bruce, for Malcolm Turnbull and coalition supporters. What about for Bill Shorten? We are seeing his satisfaction ratings plunge into negative territory. On all the comparisons against Malcolm Turnbull, he's statistically significantly behind. Well, where do you think things now stand for Bill Shorten, and whether he can, whether Labor supporters can have confidence in his ability to turn things around?
Well, I think it was always going to be a big challenge for anybody to turn this upcoming election around, particularly if it's held in March or April before the next budget. So I don't think you can hold Bill Shorten responsible if the things don't go as planned. I mean, it was going well when it looked like Tony Abbott. But look, Shorten has got his work cut out for him, but anybody would against Turnbull right now. The challenge for Bill is to really
after 2 years, shouldn't he have established what Labor wants to do and presented an alternative that is going to grab the attention of voters regardless of what the government's doing?
Well, you'd like to think that they'll be working on that during the time that Abbott was there, because it was always clear to most of us that Abbott wasn't going to get to election day just because of his inability to really engage with the Australian electorate. They didn't have to release too much in the way of policy up until now because Abbott was doing the work for them. I think the challenge now, though, is to come up with some very significant infrastructure, health, education policies, and to really put the wood on Turnbull to show what he's going to be doing, and is Turnbull going to be the person who's going to be cutting? Because right now, everyone sort of thinks that Turnbull is going to be the man that creates the magic pudding. It's just going to keep growing and growing and everything's going to be fine, without actually having put him to any sort of proof as to how he's going to turn around the economy. I think that's a challenge for Shorten, but it's also a weak spot potentially for Malcolm Turnbull. Maybe not in the short term, but in the medium term.
Now, Grahame, there's no doubt that there will be opportunities for Labor once the Prime Minister does start putting out, some actual details of where he wants to go to fix the budget. But what do you think for Bill Shorten right now? I mean, how would you describe where he's at?
Well, I think you're right. He's had a couple of years and hasn't filled in his own canvas. So, he was just vulnerable, really vulnerable to a strong opponent. Look, last week he tried, you know, being Captain Nasty. You know, you appoint Senator Dastyari as the sort of minister for helping the opposition leader becoming a grub, and then the next day Senator Dastyari does his job well, and that was all the stuff about, you know, Malcolm Turnbull's got a hell of a lot of money. Well, whoopee. You know, I just don't think Shorten looked comfortable with that sort of attack, and it didn't work anyway. So that sort of negativity against Malcolm Turnbull, I don't think it's going to work.
Bruce, would you have advised that line of attack last week?
Well, I think over a period of time, they've got to look at what Turnbull's position is on a whole raft of issues, what his own backstory is. I don't think they're ever going to get a big hit right now because he was on a honeymoon, and the Australian electorate and to a large extent the media too, is very keen to see him succeed and to poo-poo any suggestions that he's profited in any way from his involvement in investing in the Cayman Islands. So that's good news for everybody else who wants to go and invest in the Cayman Islands. Apparently it's an okay thing to do. But I think over a period of time, you have to be very, very careful if you're a man of immense wealth as he is and who's got a long history of investment and other activities. People are going to go looking for that, and they'll continue to go looking for it, and you don't know where that will actually go. But I don't think at the end of the day that's going to replace good, solid campaigning around policies and issues. It's inevitable though that sort of thing will happen. He tried it on Rudd, by the way, with the whole Gordon Gretsch thing. It backfired terribly, so he can't take too much of the moral high ground when it comes to running tough, pretty ugly sort of tactics against the other side. He did it and failed. I don't know that it backfired on Labor, but I don't think they got any credit out of it.
But all of this is happening too at the same time to Bill Shorten, as we are seeing in the Royal Commission into unions more allegations about deals he did when he was at the AWU. Last week it was the East Link project in Melbourne. Today, the Clean Event contract that was struck and a secret $25,000 arrangement to pay for union memberships wasn't part of the formal agreement because, according to the manager at Clean Event, it would look bad for the union to have it in the formal agreement. I mean, Bruce, how worried do you think Bill Shorten should be about what's going on? I know they say it's all a politically stacked inquiry, but the evidence is the evidence.
Yeah, look, I honestly don't think that this is really cutting too badly against him. I think there are other issues that he's got to be concerned about, and we talked about that policy and how he fronts up against Turnbull. I think what it's really emblematic of, in a sense, is the union connection, the union history, which I don't think cuts very well for him at all. I don't think when we get down into the minutiae and the detail of these things, people are going to be convinced either way. I think they'll just be confused, and he's not being asked back to appear before the Royal Commission as far as I'm aware anyway. So I think
well, not yet.
That will probably be the way in which this thing will play out. But it's noise, it's white noise, it doesn't help, and of course a lot of it was politically motivated by the government against him to try to make his life difficult.
Well, Grahame, what do you think about the Royal Commission?
Well, look, we won't know until the report comes out, but if Mr. Shorten's fingerprints are on shonky invoices, I think that is a problem, Bruce. It's in the old days, that's the old sort of brown paper bag sort of stuff. That is just not good. Now, it may well be that he's saying this all happened after I left, and that would be fine. That's acceptable. And some of the other things in the Royal Commission, they're a bit sharp practices, but invoices that aren't real, something very, very smelly about that.
Well, he would have to actually be brought back before the Royal Commission to answer those allegations for them to make adverse findings against him. They would actually have to put certain things to him in order to reach those conclusions. They won't be able to do that without actually bringing him back. So the proof of the pudding probably will be in whether they call him back to test the evidence.
Yeah.
Let me get your thoughts finally on how the Turnbull front bench is going. We're a month in now, Grahame. Who do you think is going well or otherwise so far?
It's clearly going well. What's different? And we talk about policies and whatnot, but Malcolm Turnbull, he said, look, the reason to change is that the economic message is not getting through, and the political message is not getting through. and you have a change, and the economic message is up there, and the political message is not there. Is there? The ministers are sort of playing very much second, third, and fourth fiddle to the boss. That will change, but I still think it'd be interesting. Who is the mug? Who's going to bring everyone crashing back to earth? Don't know.
Yeah, well, Bruce, what do you think though when you look at the lineup there and some of the head-to-heads contests that are going on in Parliament as well? I mean, what do you think? What do you see as the biggest change in dynamic in the Parliament right now?
Well, I think there's a great sense of confidence, a move to the middle, a more consensual sort of approach that they're all trying to adopt. They seem to be less antagonistic and less combative, except around issues like refugees. But put that to one side, and you do see this move to the centre. But it's all talk at the moment. It's not really being replaced by definite action.
I think that is the big change. I think that is the big change, is the tone of voice.
Yeah.
And Malcolm Turnbull's ability to be able to pick the mood and just come in just under where everyone would think he'd come in is very good.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the classic example of that was when we had that spike in the incidents of domestic violence. First thing happens, he gets Michaela Carr out there and they announce a big package. It felt a bit almost like a state premier, you know, really feeling the mood of the electorate and taking immediate action. I think that's what's different, and that's where Labor's really got to come in tough and really be prepared to engage. Otherwise, you know, it'll be very tough.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess to finish on then, Bruce, what does Bill Shorten need to do between now and the end of the year? I mean, it's all well and good to say, wait till Turnbull puts something out and then you can go in hard on that. But does Labor need to get some of its own policy ideas, try and define the debate a bit itself?
It does. It does. Right now it does. I mean, we could be looking at an election in March before the next budget comes down. So Labor has to come out with some very bold initiatives. They started doing it in the area of infrastructure, and Anthony Albanese has been out there taking a leading role in that. They have to be doing that across the board, and hopefully their policy people are working around the clock to make sure that they've got some very solid middle-of-the-road policies which are going to be appealing to the electorate at large, so that there is a genuine choice offered to the electorate whenever the election is called.
I reckon, Bruce, the main thing he's got to do is to make sure that under your former boss, Kevin Rudd's system, that 60% of his caucus doesn't start putting together a petition. That's what he's got to be careful of.
I don't think that's going to happen.
We'll have to leave it there. Well, yeah. Bruce, Hawker, Grahame Morris, good to talk to both of you. Thank you very much for that. A quick break. Back with more on PM Agenda. Stay with us.